team leader and co-founder of the Refugee and Migrant Education Network. The network was started in 2018, with our first international conference that was hosted by Manhattan College. Subsequently, because of the pandemic, virtually all of our efforts at gathering people have been on Zoom. So today we keep that reality going. This is the fourth conversation this year on topics that we think are of value to our members, to people that are in some way connected to, related to, concerned about the education of refugees or about refugees. Today's program is going to be moderated by Drew Edwards. Drew is the co-founder and executive director of Pangea Educational Development. He's also on the leadership team for Refugee and Migrant Education Network. So without any further ado, let me turn it over to Drew. Thanks, Drew.
Thanks, Tony. Welcome, everybody. We are so excited to have you here, whether you're in the Zoom call and link with us, or if you're watching the live stream or the recording after. Today, we're going to be talking about the integrative justice model, and not just understanding it conceptually, but diving into how it can be applied and how that can be useful to different practitioners and different organizations around the world in the context of refugee and migrant education. With us is Tina Facca-Mice, or Dr. Tina Facca-Mice from John Carroll University, and Father Nicky Santos from Creighton University. I'm going to hand it over to them, but I will say, as we're going throughout their presentation, if you have a question, if you have an idea as well, or just maybe a note or a comment, feel free to throw it into the chat. I may be interrupting our speakers from time to time to jump in and clarify high-level concepts. Or just interesting pieces that we might want to pull apart. But at the very end, we will have time for questions for everybody to ask and be able to have a roundtable discussion. So we're excited to have you. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to our speakers.
All right. Hold one sec. Okay, everybody see my screen? Everything look good?
Or
All right. So again, I'm Dr. Tina Facca-Mice and my colleague, Father Nicky Santos. We're going to talk about applying the integrative justice model to predict transformation in quality of life. So Pope Francis tells us that business is a vocation, and it's a noble vocation, provided that those engaged in it see themselves as challenged by a greater meaning in life. This will enable them to truly serve the common good by striving to increase the goods of this world and to make them more accessible to all. Both Father Nicky and I teach in Jesuit business schools and are very active in Jesuit business education. So the context that we're talking about, of course, is well over 82 million now refugees and migrants in need. And we look at focusing on quantifying the qualitative aspects of transformation in quality of life for beneficiaries of nonprofits, NGOs, any kind of social services. But how are the beneficiaries really transformed? How is their quality of life transformed by our interventions? And this can help us garner support. We can describe how we do this, our research methods, the analytical tools that we use, and the statistical techniques. And we do this to deliver data-driven strategic recommendations to policymakers, leadership of NGOs. And the important part is that the data is grounded in voices of the forcibly displaced persons. And amplifying their voices is critical to transforming their quality of life. So measuring the impact of our social innovations at the margins is often complicated and daunting, and we need to simplify how we do this. This way, global social entrepreneurs, philanthropists, investors will more readily engage in our work. And we can also look at scaling what works best. Policymakers can benefit from a common language of impact assessment and more readily produce our data-driven recommendations. We also would have evidence derived from commonly understood research methods and analytical techniques. And those are the methods and techniques that we'll explain today. This way also, our research is co-created with marginalized souls. And this should be more highly valued than just viewing them as mere subjects. And we want to highlight that human dignity is intrinsic to all, and respect for which is valued by all faith traditions. The outcome variable, the thing that we're trying to predict, this outcome that we want, needs to be the extent to which the experience with the organization, the NGO, the intervention not only improved, but actually transformed quality of life for the beneficiary. So instead of thinking in more quantitative measures, how many people we served, how many countries we impacted, we look more at how the beneficiary has been impacted, how their life has been transformed. And this is spoken from them in first person. And they are rating the extent to which the intervention transformed my quality of life. And I'm going to pass it off now to Father Nicky to talk about the integrative justice model.
Yeah, so I just give a little background to the integrative justice model. This really was part of my doctoral work, and it was around the time when there was growing interest in what was called the base of the pyramid market. And so the proposition being made was like, that there was a lot of market potential in low-income markets. And so, this thing of about $13 trillion. But the danger in big companies just to make money and extract profits from low-income markets could result in greater exploitation of an already disadvantaged group. And so really the integrated justice model was with a research question of how can market exchange transactions that are directed at impoverished populations be better kind of so that they're both fair and just to both parties, but particularly the impoverished population. And so we looked at about 13 different frameworks. And so really the integrated justice model is a normative framework for engaging particularly impoverished market segments. And so the roots are, moral philosophy, Catholic social teaching, and contemporary management theory with the aim of enhancing fairness and equity in economic transactions. Tina, if you can. Yeah, so basically there are these 5 key elements or tenets of the integrated justice model. The first is of an authentic engagement with particularly impoverished consumers with non-exploitative intent. The second is co-creating value, particularly with impoverished populations. The third, investment in future consumption without endangering the environment, is really kind of geared towards enabling a better participation of the impoverished in the market economy, looking at interest representation of all the stakeholders, and a focus on long-term profit management rather than short-term profit maximization. So these were the 5 kind of key tenets of the IGM. But in a study, in an empirical study that Dr. Tina and I did, some years back, one of the factors that emerged was this whole dimension of amplifying the voice of the impoverished consumer. And so we recognize that even these 5 are important, but the foundation for these 5 also is this whole thing of how do we amplify the voice of people who traditionally kind of like are voiceless or are kept on the margins.
Okay, and we are going to share a short video with you. Well, let's see if it goes.
I don't think it's. businesses to be financially sustainable and profitable, but to be able to do that in a way that's fair and just, or that is aimed at the common good, that that society and the planet can flourish.
I thought, wow, if we could teach those concepts,
create that roadmap of best practices in which the business community, if you take it seriously, offers you some insight. Doesn't always offer you all the answers, but it offers you insights as well as a potential community in which you can reach out and find that fellowship, find that community in which you can live your life as well as become a professional.
all these pieces started coming together. It was kind of my aha moment that, this is really coming to be what chokes me up, what I intended it or what I ultimately hoped for.
Okay. Let me get back. And this is just a global map of our different IJM presentations we've given over the years. Father Nikki, I think a few more for you.
Tina, we can't see the slide.
Oh boy. Okay. Resume share. That would be. Oh no. Hold please. I'm telling it to, let's go with new share. How about we do that? We just get back to where we were. Are you there? Do you see it now?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So just a little bit on, Father Nikki's going to take us through Jesuit Worldwide Learning.
Yes, just so one of the initiatives that emerged, I think it probably started in 2008, but there was some of you may be familiar with Chris Lowney. Chris and a couple other people were thinking in terms of we have Jesuit Refugee Services has these refugee camps, and often in these camps people are there for quite a long time, and some of them have already done primary education, etc., but they don't have any access to tertiary education. And so there was an initiative that they thought of was let's a couple of universities in the US, let's come together and try to provide tertiary education to refugees in the refugee camps. And so that really was a foundation for Jesuit Worldwide Learning. It was called Higher Education at the Margins. And basically it was trying to garner support from volunteer professors in the United States from different universities. And Regis University was the main thing that was giving the certificate or the degree. And a lot of it was, it was kind of done by using technology, getting facilitators on the ground, but a lot of it depended on volunteer professors in the US, and that still continues. So Dr. Tina is kind of more engaged with this initiative in recent years, and they have moved also from just focusing on refugee populations to looking at populations on the margins in general. But again, focusing on tertiary education.
And the students tell us if they had education in Darfur in this example, then we would not be refugees today. We need education so that we have a future. Do you want to keep going, Nikki, or shall I?
You can go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the model for Jesuit Worldwide Learning, learning together to transform the world, it focused on 4 key cornerstones: strategic partnerships, well, I'll start global thinking, right? They want the students to have this reflective worldview and a transformative perspective. So again, this is where we see this transformation in quality of life, this really transformed perspective coming in. Strategic partnerships that JWL focuses on are mission aligned for the greater good. So we have lots of different faith traditions, but the mission and the values are what we share. And we focused on formation in leadership for ethical commitment to peace and justice. And so that's where the use of the integrative justice model helps us measure that the extent to which we're delivering on that commitment to peace and justice. And continuous impact measurement, always highest quality fiscal stewardship, and always grounded in the voices of the students and alumni. So this work that we're sharing with you today started as a stakeholder survey, and we wanted to understand the impact on the beneficiaries and their communities, obviously for funding purposes and to really see if we were having the impact that we intended. So the IJM framework is what we use. We can again use this for strategic planning and show how we measure our impact. So it started as an alumni survey with the overall intent of evaluating the impact, but it actually evolved into a stakeholder survey to help us do a deeper investigation on the extent to which it impacted the lives of the alumni, as well as looking at them a little bit more long-term. And then the impact that it had on the communities, faculties, administrators, other staff and stakeholders. So, and the collaborators that we work with. So the feedback is collected from a variety of stakeholder groups, but what we're going to talk about today is the actual students and alumni. So this is the only statistics part, just to give you a little bit review of what we're going to talk about. So the method that we use is multiple regression analysis, and this helps us understand the variance in the outcome. So people rate all these different elements of authentic engagement and a variety of elements of value co-creation and what I refer to as decision principles. So these are questions that we use to measure authentic engagement and then to measure the extent to which we're co-creating value and measure the extent to which people feel like they're engaged or their interests are represented as stakeholders and so on. So the independent variables would be these decision principles for the tenant. The tenant would be authentic engagement or value co-creation or representation of the stakeholders' interests. That's the thing we're first going to try to predict, and then we'll get on to transformation. But the method that we use is multiple regression analysis, and we try to understand what are the significant predictors of the outcome that we want. So this desired outcome in our case would be the transformation in quality of life. You'll see arrows. Those are the drivers or the independent variables that are predictive of this outcome. And the idea is that if we focus on these variables, these significant predictors of the outcome, then that's how we know that if we increase our ratings, people are rating these on scales from 1 to 10. If we increase these ratings for these independent variables, then in turn we increase the extent to which someone feels that or the extent to which they rate the outcome variable, in this case, transformation and quality of life. So each of the variables explains a bit of the variance, a bit of the rating for that outcome variable. So together, again, if we focus on these predictors, the arrows that you'll see, then in turn we increase the ratings for the dependent variable, the outcome, the thing we're trying to predict. So I understand this, I can't get rid of this little, I don't know, bar here. So sorry about that. So we're trying to, we have a rating for overall, I feel engaged with the JWL community. So this could be your organization, any organization, same method of using these questions. So overall feeling of engagement to reflect our authentic engagement dependent variable or outcome variable. So feeling respected by the organization is the most significant predictor. In this case, this is the one with the highlights around it. Feeling respected by the organization accounts for the most variance in ratings, the most variety of responses in feeling engaged with the JWL community. The extent to which the organization supports the community and considers the needs of the people and uses contributions effectively. All these 4 variables combined explain nearly 70%, that's this R square over here to the left, 68% of the variation of the variety of responses that we get for authentic engagement. So again, if you want to increase ratings for people feeling really engaged in your organization, then you want to, in this case, I mean, this might be different for your own organization, but we want to make sure people feel respected. And again, we mentioned respect for human dignity as this real underlying component of transformation, making sure that they feel like you're supporting their community, making sure that you have methods to show that you're considering the needs of the people and that you are using your contributions effectively. So again, this is from the voice of the beneficiary, so you can see how important this transparency really is to beneficiaries of the organization in order to make sure that they're feeling engaged. And again, authentic engagement being one of the core tenets of the integrative justice model.
Tina, a really quick question for you.
Sure.
I know whenever we get to statistics can sometimes feel intimidating, and you've explained them so well. But I'm wondering if we could go back just one slide really quickly. So when you're looking at all of these different pieces, right, we have our T statistics or our mean variance there, we have our p-values to know if it's significant. How did JWL sort of look at this, what looks like a negative T statistic? How did they sort of look at that and interpret that information? How is that useful in sort of informing next steps as well?
So the best way for me that I've come across to explain like the negative predictor is that if we don't, if people are really rating like this particularly the JWL considers the needs of the people, if I'm rating that low, I'm really pulling down the scores for engagement. So we really want to make sure that people, recognize that we are considering the needs, that we're representing the needs of the organization. So when you do see a negative predictor, think of it as really pulling down, potentially really dragging down your ratings for feeling engaged with the community. Does that clarify?
That clarifies. Thank you.
Okay, great. Good question. You're sharp on your stats. So for value co-creation, overall, I feel like I'm part of creating value in my experiences with JWL, being able to have the opportunity to share in the JWL resources. Most significant predictor, again, the one, I didn't say this earlier, the one with the highest T score, in this case, 6.08. Anything over 2 is significant typically, but the one with the highest T is the one that is the strongest, most significant predictor. It's not always the first predictor in the model, but the first predictor in the model is the one that explains the most variance, the extent to which I feel I'm sharing in the resources, then adding on values alignment in the form of what I value aligns with what JWL values. Those together explain, again, we're almost up to 70% of the variance in feeling like you're part of creating value in the experience with the organization. And you can see, people are they're rating these very high because probably, they're very appreciative of the organization, but the methods really help us dig down a little bit deeper, even, given these high ratings. So it's very important to look at more than just the mean scores and say, we're doing great. Okay, and so then interest representation of the stakeholders, viewing challenges at the margins as opportunities for innovation. This is explains the most variation in people feeling like the organization understands what's important to them. And it's also the most significant predictor. So again, viewing challenges at the margins as opportunities for innovation, coupled with having relevant programs and services. again, spoken from the voice of the beneficiary. What are they saying is important to their community? What programs and services do they really need? And then volunteering in the community. Again, this is another one that's a negative predictor. So if I'm saying, no, I don't volunteer in my community, I'm probably not going to understand, really feel that JWL understands what's important to me. I'm pulling that rating down. It can, have this negative impact. So we really do want the students to be engaged in their communities. Even when we interview them for coming into the program, we ask about what else are you doing, and they'll often say, I teach primary, I teach secondary. So a lot of the students that are receiving higher education opportunities are already considering themselves or are teaching in their communities in some way. And volunteering at their med centers, or all kinds of volunteerism. So it really has a substantial impact. And then investment in future consumption. So the measure that we use or the item that we use, the question that we use to measure investment in future consumption is overall JWL helps me develop in ways that make my life better. And so understanding that I have a responsibility to contribute to my community is the most significant predictor of this overall feeling that the organization is developing me in ways that make my life better, and that my experiences are worth my time spent. These two together explain about 60% of the variance in ratings for JWL, helping me develop in ways that make my life better. And then our last one, this long-term profit management over short-term profit maximization, doesn't play as well in the context of an NGO. So we look at predicting the extent to which I feel my voice is heard in my engagement with JWL. Again, this was a latent variable that we found, and the extent to which students feel that their opinion is valued explains the most variant and is, again, the most significant predictor. JWL advocates for its stakeholders, and then coupled with my talents are valued. So these three explain over 75% of this feeling of engagement, of this feeling that your voice is heard through in the organization. So again, my opinion is valued, the organization advocates for its stakeholders, and my talents are valued. So if I want to make sure that people are feeling like their voice is heard, these are the things I need to focus on operationally to make sure that that they are feeling engaged. Okay, so now the cool part. So don't get scared by a little model, little stats here, but this is the thing we're trying to predict, the transformation in quality of life. And this is just another thing that they rate. Overall, I feel like the organization has transformed my quality of life, or my engagement has transformed my quality of life. And then we take all those predictors that we saw, all the little arrows that we saw for authentic engagement. And then we take all the predictors that we saw for value co-creation, and the ones that we had for stakeholders, those arrows that we saw, the things that we need to focus on. We take our ratings for each of those and use them as independent variables, and to try to predict the transformation in quality of life. So we put those into our multiple regression analysis as the, all being significant predictors of these tenets. And ultimately, the regression model, our software pulls out the predictors that are most significant predictors of these tenets that are most predictive of transformation. So, drum roll, please. Let me see if I can get this out of the way for us a little bit. So here's our significant predictors of transformation and quality of life for the beneficiaries in particular, in this case, the students and the alumni. So JWL helping me understand my responsibility to contribute to the good of my community. This is the first predictor in the model. And what's very important about this is that in this education that we're providing, we want students to improve their own communities, not necessarily come to the US or go to Europe, or, some of them will go on to further their education. even more so than this sort of 2-year associates level that they get, or different programs of JWL. But what's most important is training the refugees so they can either take back their communities, get back to their communities, or live a life in which they're contributing to the community that they're in at the time and really making an impact on others. So the second is that what the organization values is, aligned with what I value. This adds to the explanation. And again, our students are, this is a Catholic Jesuit organization, but our students are Muslim and some Christian, some Catholic, some, a wide variety of backgrounds, some Buddhists even in Afghanistan. So all kinds of, variety of people. But what's important is that our values align. And again, this is the most significant predictor. Highest T-score, the one with the little yellow arrow there, what I value aligns with what JWL values. And then providing relevant programs and services, and also viewing challenges at the margins as opportunities for innovation. So we would say these 4 are the things that we really need to focus on in order to ensure that we are transforming quality of life for our beneficiaries. Again, contributing to the community, values alignment, relevant programs and services, and viewing challenges at the margins as opportunities for innovation. So what we want to do then is highlight these elements in our fundraising efforts, in our marketing messages, and in our commitment to our beneficiaries. So for example, when asked how the organization actually transforms the quality of life for its beneficiaries, we have a proven statistical model that this is how we do it. And so this is, the marketing piece, right? We weave these messages, these words, these predictors, these things we need to focus on into our messaging. And we can confidently say with statistical accuracy that JWL views challenges at the margins as opportunities for innovation by providing a values-based education with relevant academic programs and services that instill a sense of responsibility to others and community. So now we've not only been able to articulate what we do, what the drivers are of the tenets of justice, but we can actually say this is how we do it. We can prove how we transform quality of life. So then we know what to focus on.
Well, and Tina, I feel like a great chance to maybe just take a really quick pause here, because often when you work with many different organizations around the world, we don't often get a chance like this to see under the hood, to really see kind of what we're evaluating, what we're looking at. And so I guess a high level question that I know that I'm wondering for our own organization, and I wonder if others might be wondering as well. You've highlighted some of these independent variables and sort of these key questions within your instrument. Do you find that these are widely applicable, almost copy and paste applicable to different organizations, or is there some specialization sort of needed to acculturate it to the particular context?
Well, yeah, I would say the questions themselves, the questions that we asked, to identify, to measure authentic engagement, to measure value co-creation, those questions are consistent, right? And we just trade out JWL for your organization. And so that part is consistent, but what varies are your beneficiaries. So how they rate these things and what's driving transformation for your organization can be very different than what drives transformation for JWL. So that's kind of the concept. We will typically see, this authentic engagement being very important to people, recognizing that my voice is heard. But the actual, we get down to the nitty gritty of these decision principles for implementing authentic engagement or implementing representation of stakeholder interests. And it could be different by organization because people are different and contexts are very different. But the overarching method and the questions that we use remain consistent.
Perfect. Thank you so much for clarifying that. And we do, if you don't mind, we do have a larger question in the chat here, and it's a really great question. Greg, I'm going to try to consolidate this into a couple sentences, but I'm going to ask for your clarification as well. We're definitely seeing an overlap across sectors to address social justice issues, sometimes in the nonprofit sector, but also in the business supply chain. There's a lot more scrutiny throughout that process. And so, Greg, it sounds like you're asking sort of this multi-regression analysis and its application. Can we use that to both, is it to sort of interrogate some of the supply chain questions, but also on the other side, really looking into some of the ESG reporting? Is that your question?
Does that clarify the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Yes. And so I respond enthusiastically that one of the elements that we're working on right now is we're motivating morally courageous marketers. In my context, my students often major in marketing and supply chain. So when we teach it, we teach the IJM as a justice auditing tool, so that and I have a group of students working on it as their experiential learning project right now to look, how can we use this as a justice auditing tool? Look at what the beneficiaries in this, or all the people in the supply chain, right? How are the people in the factory that your work, that is producing your materials in Bangladesh? How do they feel? Or do they feel represented? How do they rate these things? So yes, absolutely, enthusiastically, I respond yes. This is very much what we'd like to do, and this can show you how the different stakeholders in your organization are either on the same page or how disparate they are. Because in addition to the transformation and quality of life, we can look at things like, do our managers think and feel very differently than our our supply chain partners or the actual workers. And the more that we can bridge that gap, the more that we can reduce inequalities. And so it's part of focusing on the SDGs and reducing inequalities, but actually giving people that are potentially marginalized. We have about 40 million people in some form of modern slavery. How do we bridge that gap? And so in the supply chain is a key area of focus for us.
Now, there are a lot of implications for this in the big picture, right? And you've highlighted quite a few of them here, and I'm sure we'll talk more about the strategic planning efforts sort of as we go and dive in. One of the questions I have and often wonder when we're in this space is, and you have it here highlighted in your first sentence, but when we talk about sort of our commitments to beneficiaries, what does giving this data and reporting this data back towards beneficiaries often look like? I mean, what's a successful way to do that? Beyond keeping it within the boardroom, I guess.
Right. In programming, through your HR people, through newsletters, even simply surveying them and understanding what's important to them and getting them familiar with the methods. And we'll talk about that in a bit. But ultimately, the more that we can get, and especially in this context, the refugees and migrants themselves, to be the researchers, to be the ones to gather this data, to help us do it, then we're creating the system through which they can amplify their own voices. And that's really what we need, is methods for them to amplify their own voices and take their messages to higher ups, so to speak, to people that are decision makers. So this participatory research between the NGO, the people, the leaders, I would say, of the people that they're serving, and the people themselves, the leaders being the ones to be the refugee researchers. The more that we can develop opportunities like that, that's the big vision.
Yeah, so Drew, I just want to add a little bit to that, because that's an important point in terms of, and often, nonprofits will try to exploit the beneficiaries or the condition of the beneficiaries in their fundraising efforts, right? And so I think with the IGM, you're basically, with authentic engagement as well, you're like, we don't take advantage of the situation of the beneficiaries to try to get more fundraising dollars. Really concerned about the well-being of the beneficiaries. And so what Tina was alluding to is also like, getting research that's not just from, our point of view, but really from their point of view, and the beneficiaries, trying to get them to be the voice.
That's great. And I guess maybe just a follow-up question for both of you. I guess, do beneficiaries see the data once it's been compiled, sort of in aggregate as well?
Yes, yes, yes. That's what you really want to do. You want to be able to either, teach your refugee researchers or, your intermediary, your people that are helping you collect data. You want them to be able to present effectively to the participants. And that's really key is letting them see, this is the result, this is how we did it. And that's part of the whole concept of trying to teach this is also teaching the presentation and the advocacy skills.
Sure. And I imagine that would probably dovetail very nicely with future decisions and maybe even explaining future strategic decisions as an organization and your relationship with communities.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And having these communities feel that they're part of the process.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. So some additional examples of research objectives that we could use for the RME network. To evaluate justice perspectives from RME network stakeholders, particularly our beneficiaries, to inform our own strategic planning. We can look at preferences for key initiatives where we can collaborate. We can use the IJM as this framework, but then there's always additional questions that we ask about transformation, about expectations, about collaboration, and it's just all additional information that we can have in our strategic planning efforts. And so, of course, when ultimately we want to really look at transformation and quality of life for our beneficiaries. So this is something that we can embark on as a group. We can also look at collaborations between NGOs and university partners. We can look at determining community peace and justice perceptions of our refugees and migrants and internally displaced people. And again, these come in the form of an online survey. People can, most respondents, regardless of, their resources, they can either give you a response. This is the extent to which I feel one way or another. 1 is low, 10 is high. And that's why we use specifically that kind of a scale, because most people can respond to that. And, we don't have trouble getting the responses from participants. Because people kind of think in DECA systems, and I can think, the extent to which I feel a certain way. We can investigate examples of entrepreneurial economic exchange. Again, we talked about, participatory video research. We can have video that also helps us back up what we're saying and improving. So we might say, this is our statement about how we do it, but then we have video that helps us, the more qualitative aspect that really shows us people saying things that support our findings without necessarily, without one leading the other. And this way, this helps us look at what could be sustainable partnerships between educators and students or between donors and beneficiaries. We can also evaluate host community perceptions toward refugees to determine the extent to which they value refugees' education and skills and expertise as community resources. We did this particularly in northern Iraq in a Syrian refugee camp, and because the Syrians were very respected for their skills. And the more that the host community respects the refugees, the better things work out for both. And then can we get the host community and the refugees to build a vision of the future together on how they can develop economically? And then just some hypotheses. These are just some other concepts for you can think about applying to your own organization to attract, like we're trying to get funding resources. We're going to say, we're going to hypothesize this so that we have funding resources to prove it within the context of this communities. But
We believe that entrepreneurial economic development is more prevalent in communities where the refugees and their host community evidence few significant differences with regard to their perceptions of peace and justice. When we have these ratings on these scales from 1 to 10, we have mean scores. And so we're looking at to what extent are these mean scores comparable in that people are agreeing on things, or is there a statistically significant difference between the ways that the refugees in the host community, for example, think about peace and justice in their community or their vision of the future? We also would believe that host communities value the skills that do value the skills and expertise of the refugees are more likely to engage in sustainable economic exchange with refugees. So more long-term commitments and doing it in a more just and fair way. And that young adult refugees who rate their community higher on peace and justice are significantly more likely to engage in entrepreneurial economic exchange with the host community. And that communities, both the refugees and host, with higher perceptions of peace and justice are significantly more likely to be interested in developing a shared vision of future economic development. So, one good study in a camp with a refugee and a host community can really attack a lot of these different hypotheses. Again, I mentioned our vision of the future here is to really teach and sustain social innovation research at the margins. So we want to empower the marginalized to collect their own attitude and behavior data, to amplify their own communities' voices, and analyze and predict their own justice outcomes. And then this way they can present persuasive arguments and data-driven recommendations for advocacy. They can do this to the highest levels of the UNHCR, to their governments and economic development partners, and ultimately co-create self-sustaining entrepreneurial research enterprises. If someone is trained, it doesn't take that much to train someone. And we have curriculum I'll speak to in a minute, but this training the refugee researchers is really key. And the we can do that. We have, so many universities where the students, students now, our own university students, they want to have an impact on the world and they need help and guidance on how to do that. So this more one-on-one kind of collaborative consulting and academic accompaniment can really transform quality of life for both beneficiaries of our organizations as well as students of our universities. So we do have some online curriculum now available on how to use the IJM as an evaluation tool to assess the current state or a future state of justice, what we can expect or predict, and really within their own context. So when people are learning about the IJM, applying it to their own context is very valuable. And we can use the IJM to evaluate justice profile for a partner organization or within a supply chain, as we discussed earlier. And we teach how to develop data-driven advocacy strategies based on these predictors, how to actually do that sort of marketing piece and the advocacy piece to say this is how we transform quality of life and provide transformative justice for our beneficiaries or our stakeholders. We want to make sure that we're amplifying the voices of the consumer, especially the impoverished, and that we're having this transformative impact. Through the curriculum, participants would be able to also recognize how this ethical framework for justice impacts transformation and quality of life. So we have modules on ignited.global, and there's also accreditation available through John Carroll. Father Nikki, would you speak to the Inspirational Paradigm Project for us for a bit?
Sure. So this is a couple of years ago so after Laudato Si, kind of like, and with the acknowledgement that business education plays an important role in forming future business leaders. So there was, we had set up as part of the International Association of Jesuit Universities, a task force that was dealing primarily with transforming business education. And so this group consisted mainly of deans of Jesuit business schools from around the world, and 2 faculty members. And I was one of those faculty members because at that time I was representing the colleagues of Jesuit business education. But really it was a project of trying to reimagine business education to be better aligned with Laudato Si and with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so we've been meeting kind of like, monthly almost. And there have been a couple of things that came out from it. One was coming out with research grants for new courses or kind of even course modules that would be aligned with the inspirational paradigm. So it basically, in the inspirational paradigm, we identified some of the hungers that people had, and trying to kind of say, how do we change what we teach in our business schools that addresses some of these hungers? So it's an ongoing project, and we're looking at it from different perspectives. One is, of course, undergraduate teaching. The other is looking at transforming the MBA and the graduate courses that we offer in our Jesuit business schools. And then we also kind of now have launched with the ASCSB, which is the accrediting body for business education. We have launched a curriculum affinity group that is also kind of looking at a new approach to business education and business courses. So it's an exciting kind of initiative. It's kind of like, with the Jesuit network, but with the hope that it expands beyond the Jesuit network to business education in general.
Good, thank you. Go ahead.
Drew, we can't hear you. No, there's some feedback. Yeah, no.
Can someone mute the? Mute our participants?
Do you have any idea where that's coming from?
I don't know how to make it go away. It's gone? Are we all still together?
Yeah, I think it was from Drew's computer. I don't know what is the problem there.
Little demon in there, huh? Okay.
So,
Oh,
yeah, it is Drew.
Okay.
So Drew, there's some problem at your on your. Yeah. No, this is yeah.
What shall we do?
Yes, we've got,
Okay, well, I'm going to keep going and hopefully Autis will stop. So lastly, we just wanted, offer opportunities for collaborative projects to, engage in social, we refer to this as social innovation research at the margins, in the ways that we've done it with Jesuit Worldwide Learning, or for community peace and justice research, root causes research, particularly as it applies to the supply chain. What are these root causes of forced migration? So that's another big area of focus and imperative for Pope Francis. And we look at, we have stackable certificates where we can provide certifications that are relevant to the community itself that's in need. We can tailor things quite effectively. And there's always opportunities. So Inspired Foresight is my nonprofit. Father Nicky works with me on that as well. And we both are at universities. We both partner with our NGOs. And, together we can provide a lot of the services that are needed to do this kind of research. So, and to build programs where the refugees or migrants are actually learning how to do it themselves. We can provide academic direction. We can provide assurance of learning for the university. We can provide faith-based faculty formation, academic accompaniment. The university itself can offer accreditation and access to the tools. The online survey tool is Qualtrics. The analytical tool is SPSS. Universities can clarify their assessment parameters that they need, and the universities also can use this work as a good way to attract students to doing this kind of work. The NGOs can help us with recruiting students to be refugee researchers or whatever type of researcher you need for your organization, but giving people opportunities to do this kind of research themselves and be trained on it and get accreditation for it. The NGOs can also help us with facilitating on site and actually getting the beneficiary, working with the beneficiaries to complete surveys, to disseminate surveys, and then implement assessment tools and help us with grant writing. I mean, that's a big thing that NGOs are better at than I am, or that universities usually are. So a lot of ways to collaborate. And then lastly, we do have some going through JWL, but more importantly, how can we have the students in our Western culture classrooms that are more blessed in many different ways, or I would say more financially blessed a lot of the times than our refugees? How can we have them in the same classrooms? How can they work together? We have curriculum on the integrative justice model. We have curriculum on how to do this social innovation research and analysis. And we also have social entrepreneurship coursework and teaching students how to create their own research enterprise. So it doesn't have to be very expensive. If you had students that you could sponsor to be in it in sections of 30, not very expensive to do. And if you were interested in doing this kind of research on your own organization, again, not very expensive. We can a lot of it is data driven, so it's just a matter of getting the data in and disseminating it. But we can come up with very affordable ways for your organization to measure its impact at the margins and recognize what are the drivers of transformation and quality of life for your beneficiaries, and then use that in your advocacy strategies and your strategic planning to know exactly what it is you need to focus on to have this more transformative impact on the quality of life of your beneficiaries. And so that's us. There's our emails. Maybe somebody can stick it in the chat for us. And
So just so I don't, my email doesn't have a dot in the middle.
Oh.
Yeah, but that's okay. So there were, there was a question from Drew on the connection with the SDGs, and that's what he was trying to ask, but there was a lot of static. So Drew, I was not sure whether the question was with regard to the inspirational paradigm, which there is a strong connection, but the IJM also is very closely connected with the SDGs. In fact, Dr. Tina and I had a paper that we had presented at the Vincentian Business Ethics Conference a couple of years ago, which explicitly kind of draws the connection between the IGM and the SDGs and the UN Global Compact. And if anybody's interested, we do have an unpublished paper that we can send you. But yeah, so there's a very strong connection. And then of course, I think Dave Clifford mentioned that his own work is connected with entrepreneurial leadership and kind of looking at curriculum and pedagogy, and so he sees opportunities to collaborate. And Dave, I know that both of us, and you're in Cleveland, so I guess I'm sure there are a lot of opportunities to collaborate.
And I'll also just say I use the SDGs in all my teaching, and I use in all my classes, and I use the integrative justice model in all my classes, and also Catholic social thought. So students weave the SDGs into everything that they present. They present all these aspects of sustainable marketing, sustainable enterprise, and but they also weave the IJM. So they really see these as two key frameworks that they use for delivering on justice. And a big conversation too that and French Jesuit brought to my attention when I was talking about teaching the SDGs at the International Association of Jesuit Business Schools conference a while back in Belgium. I'm talking about the SDGs and being proud of myself for teaching the SDGs. And he mentioned that, SDGs don't work without democracy and human rights. So that kind of, was an eye-opening moment for me. And now we also make sure that our students are well aware of, we can't just talk about these, the SDGs and how we're going to implement them if we're not ensuring democracy and human rights.
Margaret, do you have a question? I think I see your hand up. Yes, you do have a question. Margaret, what is your question?
Okay, so I'm Margaret. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. First of all, I'm glad to see Father Nikki. We met at Marquette, I think, after about 3 years ago. But I'm in Uganda right now, and I work at the Catholic University. And I'm impressed with the work that's being done. And I wanted to know if there's an opportunity to collaborate with our Catholic universities in local in countries where refugees are being hosted. Obviously, Uganda is one of the most generous countries now in the world hosting your refugees. How could my university or myself maybe get involved in the work of the JWL, or how could we support identifying students or stuff like that? We definitely teach students. We have a master's program on refugee studies and stuff like that. Is there any way we could, for instance, work together?
Oh, I'd say an enthusiastic yes. Well, let's figure out a way. And Drew's in Uganda, so I'm sure between maybe we just start with a meeting between us and see what the opportunities are. But
if I'm still on.
Yes.
Yes. So I don't know. I think Drew's afraid to even put his microphone back on.
Right.
But
I think that if you don't have Father Nikki or Tina's email address, you can be in touch with the Refugee and Migrant Education Network, and we'll facilitate helping people to get connected.
right. And I'm putting mine and Nikki's emails in the chat. His correct one. Yes, and that would be wonderful. And we're always looking for new partners.
And we also just posted the info@rmenetwork.org. So those another way for this all to happen. Are there any? Is there a last question before we bring us to closure? Okay. Well, Tina, Brother Nikki, thank you both very, very much. It was a challenging and engaging opportunity. And to those of you who participated, thanks for coming. This was the fourth in this series of critical conversations. Our intent this year is to lead up to an international gathering in Rome on September 26th, 7th, and 8th. The conference will be co-sponsored with the Gregorian University. And we hope that you'll find a way to get there or be connected to us once we get the word out. We'll make a more formal announcement in May, and we'll keep you posted. Thank you all very much. Have a good day. And Drew, thank you very much. And sorry